And so we're going to segue now to our first speaker. And no one is a better example in my mind as a model, a mentor, really a social and spiritual entrepreneur. He drives into things and has changed many different people's lives. So let me introduce Dr. Randy White to us here. He's the director of the Fresno Pacific University Center for Community Transformation and a community benefit organization that serves the central San Joaquin Valley. Randy is a social and spiritual thought leader and innovator that empowers leaders to start small businesses and multiple other programs that they have there. He'll share those with you. Their mission is to equip leadership to contribute to the economic, physical, spiritual well-being of the central San Joaquin Valley. What a friend he has been. And Randy, I do believe there needs to be an award, and I'm being serious, about how a man leaves a legacy. Here's one of your sons who's got an inner city church, and here's the other son running Youth for Christ. And so the White dynasty is well established in Fresno. God bless you, and thank you for coming. Please share with us, Randy.
Thank you so much, George. Yeah, my sons are much better men than I am, and I'm grateful for that. And John, let me just say thank you to you, or I blame you, because I was in tears during your first song, and I thought, how am I going to speak after this? You never fail to lead me to worship, and I'm really grateful for that. I have never seen someone so anointed to do exactly what he is supposed to do. So thank you, John, for your ministry. And thank you, George, for your leadership and service to our valley. Greetings, everybody. Thank you for taking time this morning. It's not like you don't have something else to do, right? We all do. But I do trust it'll add maybe a new tool to your ministry toolkit and your tool belt. So that is my prayer. We're all here because we believe that God is asking us to seek the shalom of our communities, that God calls us to invest in their health and their well-being, their peace and their security, where young and old can enjoy the goodness and the abundance of God's kingdom. That's what that word shalom means. And injustice of any kind, whether it's social injustice or economic injustice, is a vandalization of that shalom. But we, as followers of Jesus, see life and potential where there appears to be only the dust of death. And that's because this is a biblical vision. It emanates from Isaiah 65, the new heavens and the new earth. It emanates from Amos, let justice roll down like mighty waters. It emanates from Zechariah, who helps us see a repaired community, safe for both the young and the very young and the very old, which are the most vulnerable, of course, in any city. The vision emanates from Isaiah, who sees repaired streets, as you just read, George, and repaired lives. And the vision emanates from Jeremiah, who calls us to seek the shalom of the city and to pray to the Lord on its behalf, because that's where we'll find our shalom. And of course, it emanates from Jesus, who calls us to the poor and to the vulnerable. But see, here's the question. Does our desire to let justice roll down like a mighty stream always mean that we need to start a new nonprofit or a new community benefit organization or even a church to make it happen? Now, community benefit ministries and charities do play an essential role in our society. Make no mistake, they're vital. I happen to lead one myself. But the need for social and economic justice solutions is so vast and so complex, especially for a city like Fresno, that to use a purely community benefit organization approach or a nonprofit approach would be the equivalent of working with one hand tied behind our back, ignoring the amazing resources and strategies available in the marketplace. And we just can't afford to do that. And yet so many of us in ministry are locked into very traditional forms of ministry. We don't have the training or the know-how to know the potential of other forms of ministry. Let me give an example. I'll from time to time try to share my screen with you a little bit here. Let me share a quote. Well, I guess I better share my screen first. Let me share a, well, I gotta move things around. Sorry, old guy at work here. Hang on just a second. Well, no, that's not going to work either. There we go. So some of you will remember in our city when Ashley Swearingen asked a very uncomfortable question of people. And here's the question. There was a room full of religious leaders, pastors, nonprofit leaders. And she said, what do you all think is the role of faith institutions in seeking the economic well-being of the city? So I looked around the room, I was there, and I have to tell you, there were nothing but blank stares. Nothing but blank stares. I mean, ask a room full of pastors what the spiritual needs of the city are, even some pastors what the social needs of the city are, and they can talk. But ask them what they think the church should do about the economic maladies or needs or challenges of a city. And they didn't go to business school. They went to seminary and they went to Bible school. And sometimes they even have attitudes about business people that are like, you're all about money but we're all about, Jesus. And there's this strange antipathy sometimes toward that community. But she was asking a prophetic question. Out of that question, we pulled teams of business people, nonprofit people together. We wrote a book called The Work of Our Hands that explores across the country how God is using business to shape and accomplish ministry goals and mission goals. And this raises to the surface an essential problem. Let's go back to thinking about nonprofits a minute here. Did you know that there are 1.5 million 501c3s in the United States? That sector is growing 10 times faster than the for-profit sector. In California alone, 144,000 501c3s. It's the state's fourth largest industry. And here's the wicked truth. Our nonprofit solutions can actually become the problem. They can become edifices that need to be propped up and themselves supported, draining most of the time and the energy of the staff and the director. It's sort of a Machiavellian 501c3 principle. Stay funded. And see, that gets even more complex when we realize that philanthropy itself is changing. The availability of charitable funds is changing. There's a lot of competition out there for the charitable dollar. And, the incentives for giving were sort of removed last year with that standard deduction going way up, giving plummeting in several sectors. And what we're left with is a lot of competition for what's left for those who are willing to give. If there's no margin in the budget, there's no mission. And so it begs the question, is there another way, a non-charity, market-based solution to solving community problems that leads the way to shalom? And the good news is there is. It's entrepreneurship applied to the common good, or what we call social enterprise. And so much of my work for the last 10 years has been in that space, helping churches and ministries understand the potential of this tool. We hear the word entrepreneur and, it can elicit like, okay, that's Elon Musk. We're talking about Tesla. We're talking about the big, celebrity entrepreneurs. The word entrepreneur it's a French word. It just means one who takes on a project. It's actually quite mundane. Thinker, business person Gregory Dees defines it as one who takes on the mission of creating and sustaining social value through innovative enterprise and bold action, transparency, accountability to the social planet, to the social fabric, and to the planet, right? For us as followers of Christ, we realized what that project is. The project itself is shalom. Shalom means the flourishing of all things. Mennonite scholar Perry Yoder says, shalom means making things the way they ought to be. Now, he's a linguist. He looked at every use of the word shalom in the Bible, and he found that every use of the word shalom in the Bible fell into one of three categories. Making things the way they ought to be in people, in other words, making them upright and moral and oriented toward God, making things the way they ought to be for people, which means they ought to have abundance, they ought to have enough, they ought to have a roof over their heads and good work to do and safety and security. And then making things the way they ought to be between people, that there would be peace among friends and even peace among nations. So how would entrepreneurship be applied as a market solution to seek economic and social shalom? That's the question. And what role could churches and ministries have in that process? So let's dive a little deeper into what is a social enterprise. Here's how we define it in my organization, the Center for Community Transformation at Fresno Pacific. A social enterprise, or a social business, as they're sometimes called, is a self-sustaining business organized around creating and measuring positive economic, social, environmental impact, solving community problems through non-charity means. Let me try that again. It is a self-sustaining business organized around creating and measuring positive economic, social, and environmental impact, solving community problems through non-charity means. So that's the definition, but let me share some examples. What we've spent the better part of a decade creating in our city. And let me just say a word about Fresno. Fresno, we all know this. It's the city with the second highest rate of concentrated poverty of any large city in the US, right behind McAllen, Texas. We have more districts and census tracts under the federal poverty line than any other large city in the United States, other than McAllen, Texas. And the concentrated poverty census tract is where 40% or more of the population lives under the federal poverty line. So after years of a purely nonprofit approach, we as people of faith created a market-oriented system that incentivizes churches and faith-filled entrepreneurs to create businesses that hire people, that have barriers to employment, or that simply seek some common good community objective while using business as the mechanism. And so through this process, which we call the Spark Tank, the big joke is we are the shark tank without the teeth, I think Carlos Huerta says. We've helped to catalyze 53 small social businesses now over the last 8 years. And we've tried to create an ecosystem to support their health. Let's see if I can go back and share my screen again. Get over to let me show you some of them. These are just the logos of a few of them. And just 20 of the 53 have just in the last 3 years produced almost $4 million in revenue and hired about 200 people, many of those who have barriers to employment. These are just a few examples, the logos of a few, but we have about a 48% now success rate, which is double the national average. And there's a reason for that, because we're a Christ-centered organization with the church often wrapping itself around a new enterprise. There are many chances to help a new enterprise work because of the resources of the church. Just share a couple of examples. A great example, North Fresno Church, Fresno Area Community Enterprises started a business called Rock Pile Yard Service. They were one of our first Spark Tank Award winners. And they often work with people in the Robinson neighborhood, and also with men coming out of prison. Pastor Lauren there told me a story one time. I've told this so many times across the country because it just symbolizes the essence of what we're all about. He had a little kid named Jeremy that was hanging out with him one summer, just soaking in all the male attention he could get. And one day he shows up with an older man in his 30s. And he introduces him to Lauren and he says, Pastor Lauren, this is my dad. His name's Jeremy too. And a few minutes later, the man came up to Lauren and said, hey, Pastor, can you help me find a job? I just got out of jail. And so they had just started Rockpile and they said, yeah, come to work. And so they put him to work. installing water-wise landscaping and doing landscaping maintenance. And a couple weeks later, got his first paycheck, but he didn't know what to do with it because he'd never had a bank account. So Pastor Lauren took him down to the Wells Fargo and got him a bank account. And a few days later, a much older man comes in looking for Pastor Lauren. Where's Pastor Lauren? Where is this Pastor Lauren? Finally comes up to Pastor Lauren and he says, what's going on here? And Pastor Lauren says, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, my son Jeremy just got out of jail, and every other time he's gotten out of jail, he's reoffended within 3 days. But this time he's got a job and a paycheck and a bank account. What's going on here? And suddenly the gospel is affecting 3 generations in a single family. That's the power of a social business. So many other stories I could tell you about just Rockpile and the stuff they're doing. They also started another company called Moving On Up, employing men from that same demographic in a small moving business. Or I could tell you about 701 United at Youth for Christ. It's a martial arts training system working with kids from the neighborhood. They pay a monthly fee, right? It's a business. And it's a hybrid. They take donations too, but the kids pay. They learn about Jesus, but they learn about discipline. And with these they've charted that they're doing better in school, getting into fewer fights. Interesting, huh? They're studying martial arts, but getting into fewer fights. Or I could tell you about Cornerstone Coffee. Cornerstone Church had an empty building. They offered it to the Lighthouse, which is a recovery center. And so they started Cornerstone Coffee, again, one of our early Spark Tank Award winners. One graduate, Elsa, started at the coffee shop as a welfare to work participant after her recovery from drugs and alcohol through the Lighthouse program. And then she was later hired to help run the clothing line, which they were also awarded for, called Lightwear. They create bling on clothing. And they sell it at the coffee shop and at a couple boutiques in the area as well. So then she was hired to help run that clothing line and the coffee shop. And with her new skills, she set up their new online ordering system once COVID hit. She's been sober for 4 years now. Not only did she meet Jesus, but she's gotten off public assistance and she's thriving in her life and her work. There's so many others that I could tell you about. Tagawa Fair Trade Company, King's Recycling, employing homeless men. The key you heard, the key word you heard in my description of what a social enterprise was, is that we measure results. So every year we're going back to these enterprises saying, how many people did you employ? Tell us some of the impact in their lives, etc. 53 Spark Tank Awards over the last 8 years. A couple hundred people employed at these enterprises, many with barriers to employment, double the national average in our success rate. Obviously, we've had some heartbreaking failures as well, which always feel like a punch in the stomach, but that's business. Most businesses actually do fail. We've trained 13 new social enterprises in our Enterprise Academy that starts in about a month. It's coming up. We've invested just over $100,000 in these enterprises, and that investment generates now about $3.72 million in revenue. I'll tell you more about the Spark Tank a little bit later. Where does the inspiration for this creative approach come from? Well, you know, the Bible talks a lot about money. It talks more about money than it does about prayer, by the way. You all know that, right? Talks a lot about money and its impact on God's people. And I will never forget learning from the well-known urbanologist, Robert Linthicum, just how deeply embedded it is in the scriptures when he reminded us of that story out of 2 Kings chapter 4. I won't take time to read it to you. I think you're familiar with it. It's called Elisha and the Widow. So this widow comes to the prophet Elisha and she says, you know, my husband, who was a prophet, has died. And now a creditor has come. Apparently my husband left debts. A creditor has come to take my children in slavery in payment of the debt. This is a common problem in the ancient world. Women were powerless, defenseless, but that's not so ancient. We still have women now who are losing their children to this or that. It could be to gangs, it could be to drug culture. It could be a number of things, but that sense of desperation of the woman who comes to the prophet and says, can you help? The prophet asks her, to define her problem, which is good. He doesn't define it for her. And then he says, well, what do you have in the house? That's a great question too. It's an asset-based question. Not what are all the things counted against you right now, but what do you have? And her first part of her response is, I don't have anything. I don't have anything. Well, I have a jar of oil. And he said, look, go to your neighbors, borrow a lot of jars, and not just a few. You and your sons go shut yourself in your room and start pouring. So she does. And of course, we have the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. We've got the miracle of the multiplication of the oil. And she pours and she pours and she pours and finally comes to the last jar. There are no more jars. And then the oil runs out. And the prophet says to her, go sell that oil. You can pay off your debt and save your sons, and you can live on the rest. Now, some scholars have looked at that and said that's a remarkable thing. It's very likely what he's done is not only solve her immediate problem, but if she'll simply reinvest some of her profits, she could become the oil seller for her particular village. This could be a little cottage industry. And look at how it was done. You've got the woman and kind of her agency, her own responsibility. You've got her family, which is part of the solution. You've got the neighbors. The community becomes part of the solution, right? And their resources. So it's a hybrid approach. Somebody had to donate something. You've got the leadership of Elisha. And who else? Oh yeah, God, right? Multiplies the resources available. This is a unique market solution to a social problem. It utilized current assets. It involved the community. It involved human energy and God's intervention. It had the possibility of a long-term sustainable solution. Can't you just feel the breath of the Spirit blowing in new possibilities for her and for her children? So we need this kind of solution in our city here and certainly elsewhere. I mean, we've talked about Fresno's concentrated poverty. We have a poverty rate that's often double, sometimes triple the national average. We have a larger number of persons re-entering society after incarceration per capita. Do you know that every day in Fresno, 100,000 children wake up poor? It is not acceptable to God that 100,000 people, children, wake up poor in our city. And those of us who've had to suffer through the ravages of COVID-19 and what it's done to the shape of our ministries, those things pale in comparison to the way COVID has affected people who are living in such vulnerable fashion. Those problems are multiplied 100-fold. It is not acceptable. It's not acceptable that women have to sell themselves to survive in our city. It is not acceptable. We're so grateful for our anti-human trafficking organizations in the city, Made for Them and Central Valley Justice Coalition and so many others breaking the chains. It is not acceptable. And we're so grateful for those organizations, but they're out there alone trying to scrape together the money to create safe houses and to do the things that women need to rebuild their lives. We need more access to sustainable economic solutions, especially solutions for the women who need a new way to earn money. Churches, charity alone will never get us where we need to go. We need every tool in the tool bag. Unless we become so arrogant to think that it's got to only be the church that offers the best solution. Well, we of course know that we offer Jesus, and that is the core of all solutions. But we also have to believe that Jesus incarnates himself in other good mechanisms as well. Raymond Brown, Catholic scholar, used to say, all truth, all real truth is God's truth. Sometimes solutions incarnate itself in the heart of a business mechanism. And that's going to provide extra tools in the tool bag. Churches are powerful allies here. They offer a customer base. They often offer a physical space. They offer mentoring from business people and the congregation. They're absolutely indispensable. But they're not the whole story. We need every player in the story. Now, if this is at all resonating for you, here's something we realized that was really important in pursuing this avenue, and this, because this is so coloring outside the lines, right? This is just not your average ministry strategy that takes up its position at pastors' conferences and traditional mechanisms. We realize it's really important to create an ecosystem where enterprises like this could thrive. So we put together free social enterprise workshops. We just held 2 last month, well attended by faith-filled entrepreneurs who want to start a business that actually makes an impact in people's lives. We run the Spark Tank, and the Spark Tank deadline, by the way, is coming up. Looking at my calendar here, it's coming up on March 10 for any church or organization that wants to submit a social business plan. And we have up to $25,000 in startup investment available. And you'll have a chance to pitch to a group of experienced entrepreneurs, and they'll help you refine. Then we offer a social enterprise academy over 2 months, just Saturday mornings, every other Saturday over 2 months, to help you refine your system, and then we'll help you launch. We last year started offering Work Life, which is an organization, which is a curriculum put out by the Chalmers organization. We are now the West Coast training hub for Work Life, and that trains people in soft skills, because we're realizing many men coming out of prison, for example, aren't even anywhere near being job ready. They need to learn some basic soft skills. In fact, the Work Life starts tonight for this year and goes for 3 days. And we have an organization in town training its staff to become facilitators for the Work Life curriculum. And then many of you know, been training faith and finance, financial literacy trainers throughout the city. We've trained more than 100 now, because we have to help people repair their financial lives. Even if they get a job or start a business, especially if they do, they need to have best practices embedded in their lives. And because we live in a poor community, we have organizations that prey upon the poor. Did you know that there are more payday lenders in Fresno than Starbucks and McDonald's combined? Payday lenders charge up to 459% interest. It's literally legalized usury between the fees and the interest that they charge. And people get locked in and kind of enslaved to this. In one of our classes in the Housing Authority, this is amazing. It's a Christ-centered financial literacy program, but the Housing Authority invited us to come and do training there, even though they know it's a Christ-centered program. Erica was a single mother of 4. She works at a full-time job at a local bakery, but she never seemed to make ends meet. And during her time at a Faith and Finances course at a Housing Authority Section 8 site, she worked on a budget. She's able to find the leaks in her spending habits. Daily, as she would walk her kids back from school, they would stop at a local convenience store and buy each kid a bag of chips and a soda. And then, because in the class we have them track their expenses, she realized she was spending close to $600 a month on those simple snacks. And she was in tears when she realized all along, if she had reduced that spending over the years, she could have had enough for a down payment on the mobile home that she had been dreaming about. And now, 6 months later, Erica has stayed faithful to her spending plan. She shares she's well on her way to acquiring that asset, which is going to move her from transitional housing to a place that she can really call home. And our next Faith and Finance financial literacy training is coming up in April. So we invite you to check that out. But all of these components act as a constellation approach. It acts as an ecosystem of resources in a city, from financial literacy training to workforce readiness training to social enterprise training to catalyzing the sparking, launching of new enterprises through the Pitch Fest. All of this forms a constellation approach. And it undergirds this effort to contribute to economic justice in our city, the need for transformation of the economic lives of those who've been overlooked. To do this, you need community partners. One organization can't do it all. You need business partners, you need academic partners, nonprofit partners, you need civic and political partners to pull this off. You can start without them, but you won't be able to create the necessary ecosystem without them. You can always go to cctfresno.org to learn how we did it and what those components are in our system. In Jeremiah 22, Jeremiah the prophet said this of the good King Josiah: he defended the cause of the poor and the needy, and so all went well with him. Is that not what it means to know me, declares the Lord? Defending the cause of the poor and the needy is evidence of our knowledge of God, because this is how God acts. And so today I'm wondering, maybe God is giving you an entrepreneurial spirit to experiment with new ministry forms like social enterprise, or to try something new, to innovate, to risk, to build a non-charity approach that seeks the well-being of the neglected of your city as a way of showing that you know and love God. Why are churches starting social businesses? Because it helps them accomplish ministry goals in a new way. They are new skills for a new era. Why does a for-profit approach work? Because it can provide sustainable margin. And again, remember, if there's no margin, there's no mission. Let me share my screen one more time, and I will see if I can find my final slide for you to put up some resources. I will show you a picture. Here's a faith and finance group, and Erica is in that group telling her story. We've got a couple of other enterprises that I could show you as well, a new coffee bar, for example. Here's the Launch Central Valley, which I didn't have much time to talk about. This is our newest program, which trains micro enterprises, not social enterprises, but trains a single entrepreneur who maybe they just got out of prison, or maybe they just have a dream, or maybe they've been living in a poor neighborhood, but they got a side hustle selling tamales and they want to turn it into their main source of income. This will teach them how to do it. For $50, we'll take them through a nine-week class and give them a business mentor and help them know how to launch their own micro business. Here's our Social Enterprise Academy as well. There's Jeremy and his son. And here is the final slide that has some information on it that you might need. I'll put the CCT website in the chat box, and we do have some upcoming opportunities as well. I'll mention also in the cctfresno.org/social enterprise URL, you'll be able to find a 4-part series, in-depth YouTube workshop that I put on social enterprise. It gets deep into the weeds about the different models that are available, which ones work, which ones we struggled with, and kind of how to sustain yourself as well as a social entrepreneur. So I'll leave those for you. And George, I think I came in under time. It's got to be the only time in the history of any talk I've ever given that I've done that.
I'm not sure we want to break up the rhythm you got. Just keep going, but you know. Wow.
I'm happy to take questions if there are questions.
Randy, that was outstanding. Go ahead and take us out of your share screen so we can see each other. And over the years, Randy, watching you, Jack Hayford came to Fresno and he said something about 300 pastors. I happened to be in this meeting, and he said there are many that can do ministry. There are many that can preach, or they can be ministry people, but there are very few that can become models, transferable, replicatable model examples. And for me, you're that you're that person. And there's just a couple in my life, really, to be honest with you. There's so many gifted people that can bring orator and fantastic solutions and strategies. And I love the spiritual strategy side, how you play in the spiritual, and then you work in the strategy, and you play in the spiritual and you work, and you went back and forth on the verses is so evident of that. You're so good at that. I just want to applaud your heart. I guess I want to just ask you something that might be a little deeply personal. You got real passionate for a minute about the 100,000 children. Was there a point earlier in your life where you had to go all in? Your passion was called out. Maybe tears came to your eyes. Maybe you were affected by someone in your neighborhood where you really felt like you could really see the redemptive reality of God, not only through you, but around you, and how that would work. Well, speak to that, maybe personal journey.
Yeah, I'll have to truncate that message because it's too long a message. But you know, our move from Clovis to the heart of the Lowell neighborhood, if we had the luxury of detachment before, or we had the luxury of just not seeing, it was erased immediately. And we, so our first 3 weeks here, there was a shootout around the corner from our house, and guns popped with the most unlethal sound. And young men with baggy pants hanging down to their knees yelled, "Did you get him? Did you get him?" And bullets ripped past my friend's house and died in a field. And we didn't know if there'd been human death there as well. And the police came and they brought their floodlights and their loudspeakers and kind of their own kind of chaos that rivaled the shooting and the shouting, and rival gangs. But turns out we slept through it. We were upstairs in our 100-year-old house with no air conditioning and a single squeaky ceiling fan above our beds. And we had the fan on high, but it was going around like 6 times in an hour, like super slow, and making this moan, like this loud moan. I won't try to reproduce it for you, but we couldn't hear anything. And next day I came down, I sat on our wide porch. It was a beautiful morning, gentle breeze nudged me peacefully awake. Tina was cooking something in the kitchen. I walked in and I saw the brilliant light filling the kitchen and the steam from the croissants rising. It was a magical morning. And then my friend came by and said, "Did you hear the shootout last night?" And we said, "No, shootout?" And he said, "You are kidding me. It was outside your window. How could you not hear the shootout?" And it was interesting. In that nanosecond, the Holy Spirit spoke to me because we were having a very different morning, right? Beautiful, magical morning. The mothers of the kids involved in that fight were having a different morning. Were they at the hospital? Were they at jail trying to find their kids? Were they at the morgue, God forbid? Our morning was magical. And in that nanosecond, the Lord said, "Randy, do you think you can sleep with the fan on anymore? Because the fact is, you've had the fan on high your whole life." Deaf to the cries of pain emanating from your city. I was in ministry. I knew about it. I could lead Bible studies on the poor. But it wasn't until I got to this neighborhood and I began to see the things that the kids, we had a tutoring program in our house for 15 years, kids from the neighborhood every week, and about 30 college kids investing in them. And I couldn't walk down the street without "Pastor Randy," you know, as I was walking by. We were deeply embedded with children. So I don't talk about these things as theoretic exercises anymore. It's impossible. I see the faces of children. So if there are 100,000 kids, I don't know all 100,000 kids waking up in poverty, but I know a lot of them from my own neighborhood. And it's because I gave up the luxury of detachment. And it also convinced me, George, of the need for a whole slew of tools that we would need, that we can have the best theology, even the most transformational concepts, but without the delivery systems, without the mechanisms, without every tool at our disposal. And by the way, not everybody's going to want to be in ministry, traditional ministry. They want to be in the ministry of business, a business that will hire hundreds of people that wouldn't have jobs otherwise and actually care about them, provide benefits, good working environment. That is ministry. And so you look at the needs around my house here and you realize, wow, the gospel can incarnate itself and express itself in so many beautiful forms. We just need to learn more of those forms. And that's probably why.
Wow, Randy, thank you. That was, I don't know what I was fishing for, but that was it, I think. And okay, so let's go to the other side of this, the strategic side. I know we have some businessmen on the phone, a couple of very accomplished businessmen, but here's a social entrepreneur guy, a ministry guy in inner city Fresno, who's created how many businesses? I mean, you've helped to create 40 something businesses. And now what, 3.7 million, was that something like okay, talk about leveraging the assets. I don't know how else that ministry people, maybe we need to get out of our shells a little bit and start thinking about how to do. I also want to say, and then, so I'm going to open up to questions, but let me just say one more thing. I was in the first part of this journey with you as an advisory on your council, your advisory group. The one word that came out to me as you were talking today was restoring dignity. It was dignity. This is dignity driven, isn't it? I mean, you're giving people back their dignity when they're able to create a job, when they're able to create a business, right? Yeah. Maybe speak to that just for a moment and then open it.
Yeah, I mean, we're recognizing the fingerprint of God on every human person. God has given every person capacity. And some can develop their capacities because they start from a position of privilege. They don't have these barriers stacked against them. Our friend H likes to talk about the ladder. America doesn't promise everybody gets to the top of the ladder, but it does promise that everybody gets to step on a rung. The problem is so many of our communities, what's at the base of the ladder is quicksand. They can't get to a rung because there are these systemic barriers. So we recognize everybody has capacity, but then the second step is to recognize we got to remove some of the barriers, make it equitable in terms of their access to the ladder. So we begin with that belief that God has created every human being, that his fingerprints are all over them. And we just need to remove barriers, create access, and walk alongside them in that journey. We've learned a lot, and as much through failure. Remember, business is hard. Most businesses fail. We have a 40+% success rate, which is double the national average, but that's still 60% of these enterprises not working. Now, some of them aren't failures. They're failure to thrive. So they're still there. They're still on the books. They're trying, but they're not going anywhere yet. So they still got time.
I'll open it up for any other questions. We have about 6-8 minutes here. Anyone want to pop a question, just unmute yourself and announce who you are.
I just want to say I'm Alan Doswell from ESA. Randy and I have been friends for many years since we were both youth leaders, me in YFC and him in InterVarsity. And I remember when CCT started and I met with Randy and he put 7 ministry ideas on his whiteboard. And I criticized him for trying to fight the war on too many fronts right at the beginning. And then I went and looked at my original vision for ESA, and I had 15 ministries that I was going to tackle right at the beginning. So Randy, isn't it good that we have a faithful shepherd, because he has led you right into the center of his will, and he's led you right into the center of something that's lacking and much needed in our community. And I've been thinking for some time, somehow the marketplace needs to come into this. But that's not my field. You know how to do that. And as we work together, wow, a lot of good things could happen. So it's good we have a Lord that leads us. Amen. And gets rid of some of our ideas and accentuates his and brings us into his will. So good for you, Ray.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate your early counsel. And for me as a person steeped in kind of traditional ministry culture 20 years ago or 30 years ago, it's important for me to have started just listening more and talking less, and especially listening to the business community, to faithful people who are in ministry through the vehicle of business, and learning from them. And as we've shaped our academy now, we've taken multiple teams through our Social Enterprise Academy that have launched. It's just so exciting to see the depth of the theological thought in the business community. Those workshops that I referred to on YouTube go into the weeds on the theology as well.
That's great.
So
That's
appreciate that.
We have another question. I think Stephanie, would you like to?
Yes. Hi, I'm Stephanie McKenzie. I live up in Marysville, about north of Sacramento. Hi there. Thank you so much. I'm so inspired and encouraged. One of my dreams and visions is to purchase a property and to start some businesses, and for women coming out of prison or jail or whatever, just, you know, in need of help recovering from drugs. And so my question is, what have you seen be the most successful? Is it the businesses that I have in mind at the moment do not exist? So have you found it more successful to put people into an existing business, or do you have startup businesses that are just like, here we go, we're doing this, and you need a person to train, obviously, and the skills needed for that business? So I'm wondering if you have an opinion about that.
Yeah. There's a short answer and a long answer. So the long answer is check out those YouTubes, because they go deep in the weeds on different models, right, of business. So you can have kind of a business in a box. Here's this product, you know, go sell this thing. Or it depends on the social problem you're trying to solve. So is the social problem kind of, if you look at Neighborhood Thrift in downtown Fresno, they work with 30 to 40 welfare to work people. They consider themselves a social enterprise. Their enterprise is really not selling stuff, thrift store stuff. Their enterprise is all about ministering to this welfare to work stream, you know, and getting them job ready, because they don't want them working at a thrift store forever. They want to prepare them. So their thing is about job readiness, and they have designed a commerce system that really helps them accomplish their mission. That's why I was saying a social enterprise manages and measures for the particular mission that they're trying to accomplish. Whereas, you know, Cornerstone Coffee downtown, they're training women coming out of rehab. They just want them to have some work skills. And they've done the deep spiritual work, but they want to just have some work skills to get them ready for their next job. It really depends on the kind of enterprise you want to do. There are these external forces, like Lana Coffee here locally is a social enterprise, but their objective is not working with the vulnerable here. It's digging clean water wells in Thailand. They say, buy coffee from Thai farmers, they bring it here, they roast it here, they sell it here, and then they return 25% of their profits to those Thai farmers in Thailand, as well as the proceeds from the sales, so that they can dig clean water wells. That's their entire business is organized around that one objective. So there is no one model. It totally depends on the women that you're going to be working with, and there are 10 different models you could choose that would really fit. But you have to know what your real objective is. So I would just say, so that's as short an answer as I can give. But the longer answer is, check those videos out, because that'll give you very specifics on different models that are available. And I would also say there are great books. I should have put some of them up there. One called The Social Entrepreneur, one called The Profitable Charity. I'll try to get them and post them in the chat.
All right, thank you very much.
You bet.
Well, thank you, Randy. What a marvelous way to kick off our California City Advance. Just beautiful. I appreciate that so much. And thank you, Stephanie, for